Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Whale Nerds podcast. This is episode 150, and my name is Caitlin. And this week we have a special guest. We have Chelsi on with us, who is a PhD student at the Thorne Lab within the Ecology and Evolution program at Stony Brook University. She earned her bachelor's degree in biology from Pace University and gained experience working with science and conservation organizations before joining the lab. Her time as a whale watch naturalist sparked a passion for whales, which ultimately shaped her research and focus. In the lab, she studies the health and conservation of humpback whales in the New York Bight. She uses drone photogrammetry to assess body conditions of New York Bight humpback whales interannually and across foraging grounds, and to model the growth relationship between body length and age. Additionally, she's using AIS data to examine how the risk of vessel strike to humpback whales on the East Coast has changed in both space and time. Outside the lab, she enjoys doing crosswords, making pasta, hiking, and reading. Welcome, Chelsi.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on.
Yeah, any other fun facts you want to add to your introduction there?
No, I've retaken up knitting.
Ooh,
And yeah, that's that's the newest update on the hobbies list. But yeah,
nice. When I was in undergrad at Oregon State, when we did our marine biology cohort out at our coastal campus, we all learned how to knit.
nice.
And our like community ecology professor, one day we were all like knitting in class and he was like, "What is going on in here?"
It's so relaxing.
Like, "We're listening." He's like, "Are you though?" We're like, "Yeah, it helps us listen."
Yeah. Yeah, it's the perfect activity.
So, it's something about marine people and knitting, I think. They also knit on the ship when I work as an expedition guide.
Oh, that would be so great. So cozy.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so for let's get into it. So where did the passion for whales start? Did you like get the whale watch job and then you were like whales are cool, or was it like the other way around?
Um, I guess it was a little bit of both. Ever since I was a kid, I like loved going to zoos and aquariums. And my mom would always take us to museums as well. So I grew up going to the American Museum of Natural History, and there they have the huge life-size model of a blue whale. I was enthralled from a young age. So I always really loved whales and dolphins, but I also grew up watching a lot of Steve Irwin, learning about Jane Goodall. So for a really long time, my goal was just like work with animals, some capacity, some form. And as I grew up and in college, I started working at the Philadelphia Zoo and Central Park Zoo, doing a lot of education. And then I got the whale watch job. I started doing my internship with the New England Aquarium Whale Watch. And it was that was like everything clicked. Whales were it for me. There was no working with animals generally. It was, I have to work with whales. Um, so yeah, it was sort of a lifelong love of whales, and then it all kind of clicked in terms of career path. So
Nice.
yeah, yeah.
So did you grow up in New York?
I grew up just outside of New York in New Jersey.
Oh,
It
okay.
was like yeah, it was like a 40-minute train ride. So it was nice. I kind of grew up in like a relatively small town in northern Jersey, but we were able to go to a lot of the zoos and aquariums and museums in New York. So I was yeah, I always really liked that.
Nice. And then so you did the New England Aquarium whale watch internship. Is that the whale and dolphin conservation one? Or is it their own in-house one?
It was a in-house one. We definitely worked like sort of with a lot of the whale watch companies in the like New England area.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, the internship was with New England Aquarium aboard the it was Boston Harbor Cruises when I worked there. I think it's
Yeah.
now City Cruises.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I worked there for my internship, and then after college, I went and worked there as a naturalist.
Oh, cool. So you
Yeah.
spent summers in Boston.
Yes. Yeah.
Nice. And so first of all, their whales do crazy cool stuff. I worked in Gloucester for a
Yeah.
couple years and like their humpbacks do some really interesting behaviors. And it's
Yeah.
pretty well documented as well, which is super cool.
Yeah.
But at what point, like in your whale watch career, did you decide like you wanted to go back to school and like get your PhD?
Oh, sure. So I had some really great undergrad mentors who taught me about like sort of the balance between teaching in a formal classroom and doing research. So they were sort of an inspiration for me. And then paired with my whale watch experience, it all sort of clicked together that I wanted to become a professor, like the professors who had mentored me, and then do whale research as sort of my concentration or focus. So I
Nice.
think, yeah, it was like my first year as a naturalist where I was like, I love the research side of photo ID and documenting the whales. And I also really love teaching, but I wanted to teach in that formal classroom setting.
Hmm.
So it was sort of after my first year as a naturalist where I was like, I think I want to pursue doing my PhD, but with a pretty set concentration on whales.
All right. And so you went to Pace for your undergrad. How did you decide to do your graduate degree at Stony Brook instead?
Sure. So when I was at Pace, I took a class called Nature in the City, and it was actually my first whale watch. It was aboard the American Princess cruises,
Hmm.
and it was just like the coolest experience. I loved it. Like I think we saw one whale, which like after being a naturalist, I'm like, oh, seems like a good trip, but like it blew my mind at the time. And we saw one humpback just feeding on like patches of menhaden.
Hmm.
And the intern or naturalist who was on board, um, they would predict where the whale would come up in the patch of bait like perfectly. It blew my mind. And then when I went up to Boston and the whales were behaving differently and doing all of these different foraging behaviors, it absolutely made me kind of look back on that first whale watch in New York and be like, wait, what was that about? They were acting kind of differently. Like
Yeah.
that, like, why are there whales in New York? They weren't there when I was growing up.
Hmm.
Um, and what are they doing there? How are they feeding? How does that interact with the whales that I'm seeing in the New England area? So when I started looking at PhD programs, I really wanted to answer questions and research the whales in New York.
Hmm.
Um, so I reached out to a few of the PIs and kind of got an understanding of what was going on in the research world in like for New York whales. And then I talked to Leslie Thorne, and I just loved her. I loved the research she was doing. So Stony Brook was a really great natural fit in terms of her research interests and her mentorship style. And yeah, and then I was thankful enough to, or I was like very grateful to be accepted to Stony Brook. So yeah,
Cool.
yeah,
So I don't know a ton about Stony Brook's programs. I mean, we're connected like through the Safina Center, but for as far as like when you go in the field and stuff, do they have their own research vessel or is it like a collaborative thing with other companies or how do you get out on the water to do your work?
oh, sure. So I'm part of the ecology and evolution program, which kind of is like broadly focused on ecology. All of my graduate classes are in ecology and evolution. But then Stony Brook itself has a marine school called SOMAS, and we have a few different boats that are mostly docked in Southampton. So we use a small research boat. It's called the Parker. It is a Parker boat, not a
Yeah.
very creative name. But yeah, so the lab uses the school's boats, which is really nice. It gives us a lot of freedom and opportunity to kind of do research when the weather cooperates with us.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah,
Cool. And so what does a fieldwork day entail for what you're trying to study? Like when you go out there, what are some of the goals of things you're trying to collect every time you're out on the water?
sure. So normal research day looks like waking up at 3 in the morning, um, which is it's a rough one for me. Um, but because our research boat is in the Hamptons, which I thought was going to be really cool before I started doing this PhD, I was like, yes, I'm going to be in the Hamptons. But functionally, it means that I just have to wake up really early to beat traffic. So wake up at 3 in the morning, try to get to the boat by 5:30 ish, And then um, we kind of just have like a 30-minute ride out past the inlet. And once we get on the water, we are just surveying wherever we think whales will be. Most of the time, that's running along the shoreline because we see humpback whales very close to shore. They're like less than 2 miles from the beach. So we usually just run parallel to the Long Island coast and try to look for humpbacks. Most of the time, they're juveniles inshore, so they're tiny. Like, I thought I was a pretty good spotter for blows, but these guys blend in and they're so
Yes.
small. Uh,
Yes.
so yeah, most of the time, we are taking a really close look near shore, and then once we see an individual, we'll just take photo ID of their dorsals. Sometimes they fluke, but not often.
Mm-hmm.
And then we will see if the whale is behaving enough, and it's sort of like if it's feeding or if it is going just swimming. And if it's just swimming, that's usually better for drone footage collection. So then we will launch the drone, film the whale for roughly 20 minutes. That's usually when the drone batteries die. Um, we catch the drone, and then if we feel like we got good footage of the whale's body condition, we'll try to move on to another whale. If not, we'll fly it again. And yeah, kind of keep doing that for roughly 8 hours and then head back home. So we have a few other objectives in terms of when we're out on the water. Like sometimes we like to fly over bottlenose dolphins to try and get some body condition for them opportunistically. Sometimes we will measure like respirations and try to get a good estimate of how often the whales are lunging and coming up for air. So there's a lot of different like offshoot projects that we try to do at the same time. But our main objective is to film the whales for body condition data.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
I have been whale watching with American Princess Cruises a few times, and that's also been my experience that it's young whales quite close to shore. Um, one time I did actually see a fairly like a bigger adult, and it was out like more where the cargo ships get anchored. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, a lot of the time it's like lunging on bunker or pogies, like in Massachusetts we call menhaden pogies,
Yeah.
and quite close to shore. So, do you ever survey like further out in the New York Bight, like out towards more of the open water out past Long Island?
Yeah, if the weather allows us to, we will definitely go offshore. To fly the drone, we have some pretty like tight weather restrictions. It has to be
Mhm.
less than 10 knots of wind, and the swell has to usually be less than 3 feet. So sometimes we can't get offshore because of the weather. But in 2024, we had a great season going off. I want to say like 10 to 15 miles offshore to Montauk.
Hmm.
And we saw so many adult whales. A lot of them are matched to the Gulf of Maine.
Yep.
So yeah, there were some familiar flukes out there. But yeah, we try to get offshore as much as we can.
Yeah, cool. I was wondering if you guys had observed that off Montauk because I had heard that I went up for a couple weeks in Massachusetts to like see friends and work a little bit, and one of my friends who's in Newburyport was like, "Oh, well, have you heard about all our whales are down off Montauk?" Because I was like, "Well, all the like the regular whales are quite south this year."
Mhm.
And she's like, "Well, yeah, I mean, some of them are even down in New York. Like we're getting matches of like our regular whales on Stellwagen down there." I was like, "What? What is happening?"
It was crazy. I remember the first day I had a friend who works in Massachusetts, and she was like, "There's a lot of whales near Montauk. Like, you should probably go check this out." And we went there, and it blew our minds. Like it was like I had some really great feeding days as a naturalist, and we usually see one or two whales a day down
Hmm.
here. But it was like some of those best days again. It was awesome.
Nice. And
Yeah.
seeing it from the small boat, I mean, that's also really cool to be able to like have that different perspective.
Yeah, that was mind blowing to me. So yeah,
Yeah,
it
I
was really
know
great.
I know the vessels on from BHC were so tall. Like you're so high up on off the water when you're up in the like upper area where you do your mic'd stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Which in
yeah,
some ways is cool to like get that bird's eye view, but like man, being eye level with them is just crazy.
yeah. It's amazing.
Um, so what is the general? trend in like humpback whale presence in the New York Bight? I mean, some years are big, other years are not, but like things are changing there, right?
Yeah, we're really trying to get a handle on how it's changing. I think over time, the drone project in the Thorne Lab has been going since 2018. Julia Stefanik started it when she was a graduate student, and um, we're really seeing some changes. Like it's definitely been like an increase over the last several years, and last year was like just a crazy amount of whales for us. So I think it's increasing. Um, we're seeing a lot of juveniles, which is wild. So yeah, yeah.
Cool. And what are some of the like, so you're doing all these studies, you're trying to get a handle on what's going on in the New York Bight. What's kind of some of the conservation outcomes that you're hoping for that your work will inform for the waters of New York and New Jersey?
Sure. I mean, I think my main goal in conservation is to bring awareness to the whales. Um, I think these whales are in such a highly urban area
Hmm.
that there are so many boats around, and some people just don't know that they're here. They haven't been here for a very long time. They're coming back. We're seeing them in just more regularly and in areas that we know people are using the water.
Hmm.
Um, so my main conservation goal is to really just bring awareness that they are here. And then, ideally it would lead to some sort of legislation as well, some sort of protection or maybe a slowdown zone more specific to New York. So yeah, really trying to get a handle on when they're here, why they're here, and how that can fit into a piece of legislation. And then, legislation is a slow process. So
Yeah.
in the meantime, bringing awareness.
Yeah, when I was out for the Safina Center does like their annual gala every year in November, and I went whale watching on the boat from American Princess Cruises. But then later in the week, my parents were in town as well, and the weather was too rough to go on the trip. Like my mom gets seasick, so I was like, nah, we're not going to do that. But we took the train and we went out to Rockaway Beach, and we could see them from shore.
Oh, that's so
So,
cool.
yeah, they're so close to the beach that I was like, if we just sit here for a while, I bet one will pop up somewhere. Like, this is where we were with the boat anyway.
Oh, that's such a good plan. My mom also gets seasick. And I remember when I was a naturalist, I brought her out on like a glassy day and she was like, I'm not feeling well. And I was
Oh
like,
no.
oh no. I was like, okay. So I feel like she hasn't seen as many whales as I'd really like her to. So that's a great idea. Maybe I'll bring her to the beach and see if we can do some spotting.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, at least in the fall, like they seem to be pretty close to shore, like to the point where you can just stand on the beach and watch them.
Yeah.
But
It's great.
do you feel like the average New Yorker is really aware that they can see whales from the beach in Long Island?
I kind of feel like no. I feel like people who are a little bit more involved in
Hmm.
like boating or fishing or things like any sort of like water activity, I feel like they might have more of a handle on it. They might be a little bit more aware of whales in New York. But I feel like for the average New Yorker who's kind of going about their day in the city, probably not.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I always kind of like to say like you can just go to the Rockaways, like you can go to the beach, you can see them, you can see them off Fire Island. Um, yeah, I mean, I feel like it depends on if you pay attention. It
Yeah.
depends on if you like going to the beach or being out on the water. But yeah, I kind of feel like there's still a lot for the average New Yorker to kind of understand about the whales here.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, when I lived in Monterey, you could see whales quite close to shore, like regularly, especially in the winter when the gray whale migration's happening, because they migrate very close to the coast. And I feel like I would still run into people really regularly that are like, "There's whales here." I'm like, "Where have you been?" Yes, there's lots of whales here.
that's wild.
So
Yeah.
I can imagine a place like New York where like people like don't even have any idea. But
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's wild to see them on the water with like I don't know, the New York City skyline to me is just so industrial
Yeah.
because like it's not a ton of like trees and wildlife, it's like a beach and then like apartment buildings. And you're
Yeah.
like, oh man. And so it does, they almost kind of seem out of place, but really it's that like they were here first and
Yeah.
then they disappeared and like now they're back.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like when people know about the whales, they always know like the whole story of like Menhaden and that's why they're here, or they'll say like, oh, like the water is much cleaner. So I feel like if people know about the
Hmm.
whales here, like they kind of understand like the whole ecosystem
Hmm.
here. But yeah, or they're like, why are you doing your PhD there? Are there whales there? I'm like, yeah, yeah, I swear it's a good choice.
I swear, this is right. I'm in the right spot.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people do share that conservation success story where, whales were eliminated from the North Atlantic during whaling, but also just the industrial development of the mid-Atlantic coast, especially, really damaged the ecosystem and the water. And so, do you think it's kind of a combination where like the ecosystem has recovered, the water's cleaner, and so the whales are coming back, but also there's just a general increase in humpback population?
I think so. I think that's sort of my best guess on it. I think definitely Menhaden probably plays a huge role, and I think we're still kind of learning exactly what that role is and how Menhaden populations have changed and how that affects the whales. I think juveniles using the space right off the coast is really interesting, and I'm kind of excited to learn a little bit more about like how they use that space and how that like how the exchange with juveniles here in the Gulf of Maine, like how
Hmm.
all of those pieces are connected. But yeah, I definitely think a lot of those factors like cleaner water and more food, and just general population increase.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think that when they get bigger, they stop targeting menhaden and they start targeting something else? Like the whales off Montauk, did they seem like they were feeding on menhaden or were they eating like herring or something?
Yeah, we never really got a great idea of what they were eating, but I'm pretty sure it was sand lamb.
Mm.
Um, I we kind of wrestle with this question a lot. It's like my favorite thought experiment. I I think there is definitely some element that like the juveniles are small enough to get inshore.
Hmm.
Like the larger whales just might not be able to like physically go to those more shallow areas. I don't know. I don't know if menhaden are like fattier fish, so it helps them like kind of grow faster, or like they need. I don't know. It's like I sort of this is like my favorite thing to wrestle with, of just exactly what's going on out there. But yeah, I don't know. I do think maybe they can't fit in the shallower waters, or it's like or it's not worth it for them when
Hmm.
like they're more practiced at eating sand lands. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen whales feed on a lot of different types of fish and krill. And it is interesting like how they make their choice because like when you look at sand lance, like they're long and like thin.
Mhm.
Then you look at a pogie and it's like a huge bulky fish. And even up in the northern part of Massachusetts, like sometimes we'll have our harbor will be full of pogies and right along shore too. And it's plenty deep. Like the big whales could definitely get in there with no issue. Like, our harbor's a couple miles long. Like there's plenty of space out of the boat traffic for them to just gorge on pogies and they never ever come in there. So, like, maybe pogies is just not a great prey choice when they get bigger. Maybe they don't like it. I don't know. It's interesting. But then I have a photo of, I think it's milkweed from this past summer down off, I went out of Plymouth and we were out like off of like Truro on the outside of the Cape,
Oh,
and
sure.
she was feeding on pogies. Like
Oh,
she did this huge surface lunge and there's two pogies like jumping out of her mouth.
oh, that's crazy.
Yeah. So, and everybody down there is like, oh, they're feeding on herring or whatever. And I was like, well, these are definitely pokies in this picture.
Oh, that's wild. Wow. See,
So,
so cool. Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know.
And
I don't know how they choose.
they definitely use different tactics depending on what fish species they're targeting as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. But
Whales are cool.
They're so cool. It's like I just want to, yeah, I want to know how they make the choice. Like,
Yeah,
how are they choosing what to eat? How are they? Yeah, I don't know.
for sure.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite memory from field work so far of like when you're out collecting data?
Ooh, I think, yeah, I think one of those the first offshore days where there was just like a ton of whales. We were surfaced like so close to the water. That was definitely one of my best memories. Um, the inshore whales don't breach a lot, which
Hmm.
when I was a naturalist, like that that sealed the deal for me. Like the first time I saw a whale breach, I was like, this is it. Um, so we had a whale that we had an adult whale, I think it was Zeppelin. She breached when we were offshore one day in Montauk, and I was like, oh, this is I forgot what an adult humpback whale breaching looked like, and being close to the surface like that, or yeah, like on the water line in a small boat, that was incredible. So those are some of my favorite memories. Sometimes like the perspective of the drone is really cool.
Hmm.
We saw a tuna and I think a blue shark interacting. We just happened to fly the
Mm.
drone, and the tuna was like swimming really quickly to the blue shark, and it was I think what we found online was that the tuna was probably like scratching itself on the shark's skin,
Oh.
but we just happened to fly over it at the right time in the right place. So that kind of like just random sighting was really cool to see, and probably one of my favorite fieldwork memories too.
It's also so cool that like you guys get tuna in like close to shore, like in along the shoreline of New York. Like it's just that's wild.
Yeah, it's so weird, but it's always really cool to see.
It's just something, I don't know, maybe just from if it's because I'm from the West Coast and like normally you have to go really far offshore to catch the tuna here, but like it's just so weird that they're so close to shore over there.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes we'll see a weird little splash and we're like, what was that? And most likely a tuna. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Have you seen other species of whales when you're out doing your work? Like, do you guys get minke whales?
Yeah, we have an occasional minke every once in a while. Not much. We have one that kind of sticks around the inlet, which is like
Mm.
kind of cute. We're like, oh, we think it's the same one. Um, and then we get some fin whales. When we do our offshore days, we'll usually have like one or two fin whales.
Oh, cool.
Um, yeah, yeah. So those are always really nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
As you do your work, are you gonna like analyze some of your data looking at like the acoustics data as well of what's going on further offshore in the New York Bight to try and get a handle on humpback whale presence and stuff like that?
Um, I personally don't work with acoustic data. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the Thorne Lab has a few people that might start working with acoustic data.
Hmm.
And I know that the the Stony Brook Marine School, SOMAS, does a lot of work with gliders.
Mm.
So they're sort of looking at some of the whale presence that they have with their glider missions, but I don't have any plans to do acoustic work in the future.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
just didn't know if it would help you with like population information or anything like that.
Yeah, I think some other people in the lab are definitely looking at it, but yeah, acoustic stuff like kind of boggles my mind, and and I've never done anything with it,
Yeah.
so I'll leave it to the people who are like really good at that.
Yeah. Fair enough. So over the time that you spent with, I mean, you've spent time with whales in the Gulf of Maine, but also like with the whales you're studying in New York, what do you what do you think is the biggest threats to their use of the space and also just in general their population recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the vessel traffic in New York is particularly high. I mean,
Hmm.
the port of New York and New Jersey is just incredibly busy.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of cargo vessels. We have just a lot of general vessel traffic. Um, Further uh, east on Long Island, there's also just a lot of like recreational boating and a lot of
Hmm.
fishing. Um, so I just think the vessel use in New York is just incredibly high for these whales. Um, yeah, and paired with a lack of general awareness that they're here, I think it
Hmm.
makes for a particularly dangerous situation. So yeah, I would say that vessel traffic is their biggest threat, and then there's also the threat of entanglement.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think vessel traffic's probably more acute here, but Absolutely. Yeah.
Is there, for entanglement, is there a response team in your area?
I think there are a few individuals who work as a response team, um, but I am not entirely sure. There's not the dedicated, very close response team,
Hmm.
like the Center for Coastal Studies response team.
Yeah.
But when we've seen entangled individuals or individuals we suspected were entanglement, we called the Center for Coastal Studies response team, and they were sort of coordinating who could come out and
Mm.
attend to that individual. After we realized after we sent them more documentation, we realized the individual wasn't entanglement or it wasn't
Hmm.
entangled. We never had to. Um, but yeah, I think there is response here. But I'm not sure if like who exactly that would be.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess I never even really thought of it like until I was talking with you. I was like, wait, who would respond to that down there?
Yeah, I think the Center for Coastal Studies response team came out when we had um I think it was Nile 16 calf was
Mm,
entangled in a really bad entanglement. But I'm actually not sure of all of the details on that story. But
yeah.
um, but yeah, I think it's a coordinated response with them.
Yeah. Interesting. It's kind of there's a gap between the south of Massachusetts and I think like the next team's in like Virginia or something.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah. Um, okay, so the New York Bight and Wales are also like in the news off and on about this offshore wind business. We've
Yeah.
covered it on the podcast before and kind of just talked about, first of all, just how industrial the New York Bight is in general with everything that goes on in that stretch of water. And I'm just amazed that whales survive at all in there, to be honest. Um,
Fair.
but like, what's your like, do you notice anything that gives you any suspicion of offshore wind when you're out working, or like what's your overarching take on offshore wind in the New York Bight?
Sure. I mean, I personally haven't noticed any difference in the whales' um, behavior or anything acutely linked to offshore wind. I think a lot of the strandings that we were seeing in the New York Bight, particularly part of the unusual mortality event,
Mm-hmm.
are linked to an increase in vessel strikes
Mm-hmm.
and vessel traffic. So I personally don't think that the offshore wind is causing some of the problems that we're seeing in the whale population,
Mm-hmm.
or that unusual mortality event. But I think with any large construction process, we should probably continue researching it pre, during, and after the effects of it. So I think there's really always a need for more information regarding offshore wind.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of the narratives that have been pushed in some of those media articles is not scientifically what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Doesn't match up with what you're seeing in the field.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I agree. I kind of follow all the stranding reports and like the unusual mortality event updates, and a lot of the ones where they have determined cause of death has been vessel strike.
Yeah,
So, and I think some of that is just like you said, legislation's very slow. And so as much as we want to write these updated policies and like shift the box and boundaries of the slow zone, like it just depends on where the whales are and where the bait is every year. And so like with right whales, I feel like they're really trying to keep up with like where the right whales are, but the humpbacks and other species of whales also kind of need that same shifting, like I don't know what's the right word, shifting slow zone or shifting awareness zone or whatever.
yeah, yeah,
Because I mean, that's partially what happened with right whales. What was that? Starting in 2017, they started going up into Canada and there was like no protection in the habitat they were using. And all of a sudden, a bunch of them died. And they were like, whoa, what happened here?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, so it could be just that as the whales change where they are, people just had no idea that whales are
Mhm.
showing up in places where they've never been before. Or, well, never been in recent human memory.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, if you had to recommend like one thing for people, the average person that they could do to protect whales in the New York Bight, like what would it be?
Oh, sure. I mean, I really think just raising awareness that they're here. I think if
Mm-hmm.
you have a friend who's out on a boat, or who has a boat, or if you're thinking about going out on a boat, really understanding those CSL like whale guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding how to be around them. We tend to see a lot of people who are fishing. They go for where the fish are, and then they don't really understand how to navigate around the whales, which makes sense because whales weren't here when they were probably starting to fish. Now that's a whole thing that they have to learn how to navigate around, and
Mm-hmm.
the whales here can be tricky. Um, so I think, yeah, just sort of boater education is really important here. Even if you don't, or you aren't often on a boat. And then really just, yeah, kind of spreading awareness that they're here. I think generally supporting environmental protection. Yeah, voting, being an active citizen, sort of all of those downstream things to protect the environment and protect our natural resources. So yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the see what is it? See it blow, go slow. Is that the NOAA campaign?
Oh, I do like that. Yeah. Yeah.
I should just put stickers on everybody's boat in the marina.
It'd be good. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite humpback whale from when you worked in the Gulf of Maine?
Oh, I do. I love Nile. I think she's great. We droned her this summer and I was so excited. I think my lab members who aren't as familiar with the Gulf of Maine catalog were like, cool, that's an awesome whale. And
You're
I was
like,
like, no, you don't
great.
understand. Like I love her. And then I think my absolutely favorite whale is probably Etch a Sketch. Um,
Ah,
yeah, I think she's just such a pretty kick feeder, and kick feeding was my favorite
she is,
foraging
yeah,
behavior.
she is a big kick feeder.
Yeah.
Um, I think she's down in Turks and Caicos now. She was in Samana, and I think they've seen her
Oh,
in Turks now.
that's awesome.
So,
Do you have a
yeah.
favorite whale?
Uh, no, but I have seen some of them do some really interesting behaviors that I think's really unique. There's a whale named Tornado who we don't see super often. And she did like this really weird thing where she was like swimming at the surface and then she like rode forward with both of her flippers and then kicked and then came up
Oh,
underneath the fish. And I was like, that is the wildest thing I think I've ever seen a humpback whale do.
that's so cool.
Um, and then some of them have their own little unique like bubble net patterns, like Dross.
Mm,
She blows like more one of those like P-shaped loops instead of a
mm,
perfect circle, which I think is kind of unique. Um, and then a couple years ago, we had a whale named Abyss who was super friendly with boats like the whole season. And
yes,
yeah, that was a
yeah.
cool whale.
Abyss was cool. Abyss has the black flippers, the
Yeah,
black peck flippers. Yeah,
yeah, and the blacktail. Yeah,
yeah.
so really unique in the Gulf of Maine. Also, that's like coming from the West Coast, our all of our whales have black flippers. And so
Oh
when
yeah,
yeah, when I came out to the East Coast, I was like, this is illegal. This is so easy to track them underwater. Like, are you kidding me? They just have two glow sticks attached to them. No wonder it's easy to see where they're gonna come up. I was like, you don't know the struggle of the West Coast where they all have black flippers and all have black tails.
yeah. That's gotta be very tricky.
Yeah, because the water's just as murky on the West Coast, and so when you're trying to follow them, it's impossible. But my impression of Nile is that she's a little thief.
Yeah, I love that about her. It's so funny.
Okay, that's why you like her, is because she's a thief.
Yeah, she's so great.
Like I was watching, I forget who it was, but a couple other whales were kick feeding really good, and then like on the third one, Nile just came in for one and then took off, and I was like, really? It's gonna take advantage of all of their work.
So funny.
Oh, jeez. So if people want to follow along with what you're doing and what the lab is doing, how can they do that?
Sure. Yeah, we have a lab Instagram. I think it's Thorne Lab SBU. And I usually am doing the posts. Um, so that's usually where a lot of the lab updates and my professional updates kind of go to. I don't have a science, I guess it's not Twitter anymore. But I don't have like a science blue sky or any kind of
Hmm.
things like that. But yeah, the lab. the lab Instagram or the lab page itself is usually a good place to follow updates.
Nice. And is there ways for people to support your work or support the lab's work?
Yeah, I mean, always getting in touch, like collaborating and kind of following us, following along, and yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure how to support, but yeah, just generally collaborating and kind of sharing information with us. If you see any sightings, that's always incredibly supportive, especially for people if you see them along the beach, just so we have
Hmm.
a good idea of where to go. So yeah, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for being on this episode. I am always happy to talk about East Coast humpbacks and especially New York humpbacks. And I'll say thank you to Alex for connecting us through the Safina Center because he was like, "Oh, this girl that I go to school with, she's doing cool whale stuff, and like you're doing cool whale stuff." And I was like, "Okay." We're like at the gala, and I was like kind of caught off guard, and I was like, "Okay." He's like, "I'll email you both right now," and I was like, "Okay." Thanks.
I love Alex. He's wonderful.
He's awesome, and he's doing cool stuff too. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, so thank you, Alex,
Yeah.
and thank you, Chelsea, for being on this episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to everybody that was listening. You can always follow the podcast on social media at Whale Nerds, or you can check out our website, thewhalenerds.com, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.